when we were talking about Miss Jackson. What's the most memorable part? Forever, ever, forever,
Exactly. Yep.
ever. Just like Q-Tip, do that, do that, do that, that. So yeah, so some similar genius going on in terms of making the simple sound beautiful and sublime.
1, 2, 3, 2, 2, 3.
All right, man. It's been a minute since we sat down to do one of these things. It's been a busy few weeks.
I know. I feel like the first episode we did, there was a gap between the first one and the second.
There was, yeah.
Yeah, and this is, I guess, us ending our season kind of the way we started our season, with like the gap between the second to last episode and the last episode. So
coming full circle, yeah. I mean, to be fair, we did kind of add one in that wasn't on the original list. The Outcast and Nirvana one was not on the original thing, but I think it's important to touch on both of them in the first season anyway.
Yeah, no remix.
All right, so today we're hitting Tribe Called Quest's award tour and the Beatles, Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band, and With a Little Help from My Friends, which are kind of the same song-ish. That one kind of flows into the next. So we'll get to that in a minute. But so I'm sort of familiar with Tribe, but not a ton. And like I get a different vibe from their music than some of the others. So maybe you can talk a little bit about like what makes them different or makes them special, or why this song.
In terms of Tribe?
Yeah.
Or
this song particularly, either one.
Like, are you saying, is there something about this song that like makes it special in retrospect to Tribe, or
and into the wider culture and everything else too? Sure, yeah.
I don't know if they have so much special stuff, Andrew. So that's kind of a loaded question. That's why it's like when you said that, I was thinking like you're saying that about Tribe, because just for me, they have other songs that are worthy of being covered. But this song is probably still, this along with Electric Relaxation are their two biggest hits. And I'm going to tell you what, it's just one of the best beats ever.
Is it? Okay.
And so if you want to know something really about this song, it's the beat. It's the way the beat comes on. It is one of the most recognizable intro beat-wise hip hop history. Like, you know what song it is as soon as it comes on, and it kind of has a Tribe is like the feel-good crew of hip hop.
Okay, cool. Yeah, that's the vibe I get too.
Right. And I guess by the time they've made People's Instinctive Travels and the Low End Theory, that's well established. And Award Tour is the lead single to their third album, Midnight Marauders.
Okay.
And so it's like the feel-good kids coming back
for
the third go-round. And it feels as good aesthetically when you first hear it as it ever did, you know?
Yeah. And so it's a great song. Like it's just not one of the ones. I mean, I knew it sort of. I mean, we'll talk about the pieces that we're familiar with later, but like they have many other songs that I am more familiar with. Scenario and Can I Kick It? And I mean, like those are obviously more familiar. Bonita Applebaum, that's them too, right?
Yep.
Yeah, like it's like I'm more familiar with those for sure. But
okay, so and all of those songs that you're talking about preceded this song.
Okay.
But now I want you to think about those songs beat-wise and think about this song beat-wise. You get what I'm saying? That's what I mean. It's like we're saying how important this song is to their catalog might be slightly disrespectful to other brilliant songs they've made, some of them which you just listed, but none of them have the beat like this.
Yeah, the beat's cool, man. Like,
yeah, it's cool. And immediately when it comes in, boom, 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 it's easy, it's catchy, it feels right.
Smooth, right?
Smooth. It's very smooth. Well, I mean, what they did on their second album, The Low End Theory, in 1991, is they were the first hip hop group, or I guess people involved in this spectrum, to really take on and incorporate jazz to a full-on spectrum in terms of incorporating its sample and loop and style-wise.
Okay, cool.
Into hip hop, like them and De La had kind of dabbled in it before, and Jungle Brothers. But they just kind of went full on the Low End Theory, and it's just brilliant. Like one of the songs is called Jazz. Who got the jazz? We got the jazz. So there's a there's always a jazzy feel to their music, and Award Tour is that too. It just doesn't feel it's the perfect fusion of their jazz sensibilities meeting their hip hop sensibilities. And it's a brilliant verse by Q-Tip, who has one of the most noticeable and brilliant voices in hip hop history.
It's very different than a lot of
Yeah.
the others we've talked about, but yeah.
Well, his voice is quite frankly softer than the other voices and more quirky. And and the way that he identifies his voice on the record isn't by like bellowing and speaking over the track. It's kind of like speaking subtly and
it's gliding, kind of, right?
Yes. And so this record is probably, I mean, for me, this is one of his 2 or 3 best verses, probably. Like for me personally,
it's a great verse. Yeah.
It's a great verse, you know, and it kind of encompasses everything that's about them. Like his rhyme scheme isn't super complicated, but it's super dope. The beat isn't super complicated, but it's super dope, and it just makes you feel good. And this is what they do well. And it was a good moment for them, because this was when people outside, I think, of the hip hop community and Spear really took note of them on a major level. And that's why I wanted to cover. This was kind of like their coming out party. This was a group that, according to the source, had actually, you know, made 2 perfect albums on their first 2 tries and gotten 5 mics both times.
That's a pretty rare thing, right?
It's almost impossible.
Yeah, that's what I thought. I was pretty sure I knew that, but I want to make sure for people who like are coming to this as, you know, other 40-year-old white men or whatever, like that, getting 5 mics from the source is like a super, 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 super rare thing.
How about this? I would say I'll say it like this: like, if you got 5 mics from the source before 2000, those are legit 5 mic albums. They gave a lot of albums, because they didn't give it to a lot of albums. But, and I've quibbled that the Tribe's first album is probably least deserving of that 5 mic status. But I mean, I don't question the Low End Theory at all.
Well, no, low end theory, even I'm familiar with. It's how great it is. Like that's, and like when I was starting out, like when we started out this episode, and I said, you know, please help me understand some about this. Like I'm not trying to question their genius. I'm like, this is not something. They are one of the groups I know least about that we've talked about. So I'm trying to get you to like educate me a little bit. I want to make sure I don't come across as like I'm insulting the flow.
Hey, well, also too, they're part of the Native Tongues crew, which are extensions of the Zulu Nation. So, and they're from Queens. I mean, me on a personal level, I actually have a old coworker and friend who actually is from Queens that grew up with the 4th member, Jerobi, who's present on the first album, and then not present, but still kind of around the group, you know, and, you know, obviously grew up with the guys. So I've heard stories about these guys personally, and they're just really fun-loving, good brothers who like love hip hop. And so that was always their thing. They didn't have necessarily, because you have to understand, they're coming on the heels of NWA and Public Enemy.
Right.
And so they're actually the middle ground of that, if that makes any sense. It's like, well, where NWA is super gangster and, you know, very controversial for that side to the nature of their lyrics. And Public Enemy is over here and super conscious, and Chuck B's talking about Farrakhan and how brilliant
Farrakhan. Political stuff, sure, yeah.
I mean, you have to understand, Chuck B is calling Farrakhan a brilliant man, and like in the middle of the crack era, like in the 80s, like so the shock value on that is almost as high as the gangster stuff that NWA is saying. Tribe is just a hip hop group from Queens, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So they were kind of like the medium for, it's like there was no, and I don't want to say NWA and Public Enemy were gimmicks, because that's not the way to say it, but there was no stick with Tribe. It was just on some rap shit, you know?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. They're not trying to make like a larger point. Am I saying that correctly? Okay.
Right. Like this. I hate to say it like this. This is kind of why I quibble about people's instinctive in terms of like it being a 5 mic album. Well, there's social commentary. It's just not a lot of social commentary going on. They're not really moving the meter in that way. They're moving the meter on just like a fundamental hip hop level of like, you know, the beats and the rhymes are groovy and dope, and they're funky and they're different.
Yeah.
And these guys are, you know, and it's cool. Yeah. And they're from Queens. So, you know.
That's, they have that background, a background where they could ostensibly talk about harder stuff if they wanted to. Like that's
I mean, Q-Tip,
that would have been their lived experience too, right? Am I saying that? Yeah. Okay.
Correct.
Yeah.
they've seen some things themselves. Q-Tip is one of the greatest hip hop producers of all time, and one of the best hip hop producers that probably doesn't get talked about because he's the executive producer of pretty much these albums. So the two records and 5 mics, like People's Instinctive, the Low End Theory, Midnight Marauders, he's doing these beats.
Wow.
Yeah, he's doing most of these beats. Later on, you're familiar with Jay Dilla, right?
I know that name, but I don't know anything about him.
Okay. But we'll talk Dilla more. Dilla started taking on more of the production roles. Dilla's a better beat maker than Q-Tip. But Q-Tip produced One Love by Nas off Illmatic.
Okay,
and
I do know that song, obviously.
Yeah, produced stuff off the infamous Give Up the Goods, Drink Away the Pain, which he's actually featured on. That's one of his best verses too. So Q-Tip's a hip hop guy, and he's one of those guys that's more part of our culture than people really realize. When you if you were to remove him from hip hop, you would be missing a lot of classic East Coast hip hop. Like, he's important.
Yeah, like we've talked about this before in a previous episode, but I became familiar with him independent of Tribe when he did a verse on an REM song in like 2003, I think it was. He did the outro to a song called The Outsiders, and like I didn't know that. I mean, I looked, obviously it says on the liner notes is, featuring Q-Tip or whatever. And, but it's that same voice, and the song is really, really smooth too. It's not one of REM's best songs, but he takes it and makes it better. Like in a way that they couldn't.
He's one of the few guys that can just make stuff work with his voice.
Yeah.
Like hip hop wise, it's like, even if his rhyme and his lyrics aren't that dope, he still can come off dope because his voice is dope like that.
Yeah. Yeah. And like we said, it's different. Like, it's different. Like, it's funny that we've talked about smooth and about whatever. Like, one of my actual notes before we even started was like, I don't know if like this music feels smoother, it feels friendlier, like it's more collegial. And we've talked about like the members of Wu-Tang Clan, for example, being friends with each other, but also it being like a really competitive kind of vibe. Like, they're trying to outdo each other, and you don't get that. I mean, maybe Phife and Q-Tip are, but I don't know. I don't get that vibe from Tribe songs. Like, they're trying to one up each other necessarily.
No, but what did go on is that, well, I mean, and Phife has an album out posthumously, unfortunately, rest in peace to Phife.
Yeah.
The album is really, really dope, actually.
I've heard good things about it.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of people feel like it's better than their last album, which got released, shortly after he passed originally. But to that, I will say, never trying to one up each other, but creative wise, because Q-Tip was such a genius and was such ahead of the group in terms of behind the scenes production wise and front wise with the rhymes. Phife's greatness never really got to show itself subject matter and I think topic wise. So some of the rougher, edgier stuff, I think that you're talking about that they never really did, came from more of Q-Tip's scope. And I think if Phife would have had more of a say, it probably could have went more into that realm. And I think, and I don't want to, say this for certain, I think that did have something to do with the separation, was just not even like having a problem with each other, but creatively, Phife may be wanting to express himself more than he could with the tone of who Tribe was. Because you also have, this is what I mean too. By the time they're making this record, they're already the feel-good kids,
Okay.
But if you really go look at the history of it, People's Instinctives, and my other co-host on According to Hip Hop, Mike Gothard, Mike often says this. Well, People's Instinctive is damn near a Q-Tip solo album. Phife only has 3 verses on their first album.
Oh wow!
So it's like literally almost all Q-Tip, and then they do Low End Theory, which is I'd say, and I can't recall it offhand, but it's probably 60% Q-Tip and 40% Phife. So even though Phife's on there like significantly more and more of a factor, it's still mostly Q-Tip, and production-wise still Q-Tip.
Right.
So by the time they're coming out with Award Tour, which is the lead single off Midnight Marauders, their third album, the image has kind of already been crafted, okay? And so maybe not quite possibly totally the image Phife wants, but it's like when you're part of 2 classic albums, and you're releasing a third, who's going to argue with that? Your kids
you
from
kind of
Queens.
ride with it.
Yeah, your kids from Queens. Like I can remember Fife talking on the first single off their fourth album, Beats, Rhymes, and Life. Once again, 4 albums deep for Quest, but still we paying dues. You know, so he was obviously speaking to like, you know, some things, even one album after that, which wasn't as good as this one, because this was their last classic piece of work. Yeah. And their last, I mean, yeah, this is their last classic piece of work, in my opinion. Maybe not their last classic song, but Midnight Marauders and Award Tour, Electric Relaxation, that's their last, you know, seminal piece of work. So.
Wow, cool. Okay. So that gives me a lot more context for both them and the song. I didn't know that it was one of their later songs. Like it came after all of the ones that I was more familiar with.
I mean, I wouldn't say later. I mean, when you look at their career, I mean, technically they've done 6 albums together.
So halfway then.
So one of those was the one that just recently got released a few years ago, like the last couple of years. So really, if you look at their like career actively, it was 5 albums, and then the group broke up after the Love Movement. And I think the Love Movement came out the same day Clem and I did. So that was our senior year of high school.
Okay.
Yeah. Love Movement came out the same day. Yeah.
Yeah,
that's who Andre's talking about on Rosa Parks, Andrew.
Okay.
He's talking about Tribe. You know, when he's talking about but I went out and bought it because I thought it would be jamming, but they clamming off. Like he's talking about Tribe when he's talking about his favorite group falling off.
Yes.
When the record get to skipping and slowing down, yeah, he's talking about Tribe.
We should kick off the next season with Rosa Parks then, because that would be a good segue. We got to talk. I mean, there's so many other things we got to talk about too. Like
he's a big Busta Rhymes and Q-Tip fan.
Yeah, that tracks. Yeah, I see that, and the way you just described Fife and Q-Tip seems similar-ish to how you would describe Andre and Big Boy. Like the not necessarily with the amount of work they do necessarily from what you've said before, but like the way their positions in the group interplay with each other.
Yes.
Seems similar-ish anyway.
Yes. Good comparison. Yeah. There are some very succinct, nuanced differences, but the big picture of it, the macro of it, yes, I can say that. Yeah.
Okay. So like, and I want to make sure that clearly you know, but like the viewers also know that I'm not trying to act like I know a lot about this. Part of my learning process is trying to say back to you things that you've said to me to make sure that I'm understanding it correctly.
No, and I get that, but I don't think you give yourself enough credit either. You know what I mean? Because you know music. And so like at the end of the day, it's kind of like you tell me stuff, and what I really ask for is like a dot to connect that makes me trust what I already know. So it's like most of the stuff that you already know. It's like just trust it. It's just a different realm. And so, like for me, I'm just always looking to connect the dots to what you're saying. You know what I'm saying? Sure. I kind of trust what I know with music. You know what I'm saying? So I think you're closer to being on base with a lot of your thoughts than you really think. You know what I mean? Just because you're not as immersed in hip hop as I am doesn't mean you're not immersed in music, though. You know what I mean?
Sure. Yeah. So, I just don't ever want to come off like I'm trying to like be an expert in something that I don't really know about. So I'm learning. Are we segueing over now? Is that a okay time?
Yeah.
Okay. So a lot of the things that you were saying actually, it's interesting because when I selected this Sgt. Pepper and with a little help from my friends to go with Award Tour, I didn't necessarily think it through a ton. It just says, oh, it was one of those things that kind of felt right, but not. And then like listening to you talk about Award Tour, there are lots of things that kind of click into place. This Sgt. Pepper, I'm going to call it Sgt. Pepper, but it's Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band is the full name of both the album, and it's like the intro, and it's like the intro song on the album too. It's called that, and there's a reprise at the end of the album too. But this album also comes about halfway through the Beatles' career, maybe a little nearer the end than the beginning. It comes at a place where they can't tour anymore. Like they are too big to tour, and that's not happened for very many people. Like they can't go out. Basically, they can't like go out in public and play because the people are screaming so loudly they can't hear each other standing right next to each other on the stage. Like an album about. It's not an album about it, but it's an album that comes from like how famous they were. And it's hard to understand. Like there's no real comparison for how famous they were. I mean, there are people that are. I mean, Michael Jackson probably comes the closest. But they're not people in like the wider culture that are like that. They were like, I don't know, like the Dream Team in 1992. Is that kind of people mobbing them kind of way. And so Sergeant Pepper they are creating almost another persona for themselves. So they're performing a concert. That's the conceit of the album. It's a concept album, sort of. They're performing a concert as Sergeant Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band, which sounds like a lounge act, right? And you see them on the cover of the album with the brightly colored general, like almost making fun of military, like British military with the little tassels and shit. So they're poking fun at their own fame a little bit, but they're also creating like a kind of conceit that will allow them to just play music again. But these songs on both the two that we're going to discuss, Sergeant Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band, and with a little help from my friends, neither of them were ever performed live by the full Beatles band. And none of the songs from this album are performed live other than by individual Beatles as part of their like solo shows. They are never performed live as part of like the Beatles as a collective.
So a couple things that I thought about just from your I guess your soliloquy about the Beatles and about this song and about this album. First thought is, when you talked about the cover, it made me want to pull up the cover because I've seen it before. I hadn't looked at it in a while.
It's really bright.
It's really bright. So you want to know what I thought about on a hip hop level? I thought Kendrick Lamar used some of this artistically onto Pimp a Butterfly and reversed it.
Okay.
Because both of those albums are about fame. This album's about fame. So is To Pimp a Butterfly, just in a different way. You know, it's really about what fame has done to a kid from the inner city and the world that he sees now that he's acquired fame. And I think what Sergeant Pepper's is for them, and I could be wrong, you know, so maybe you can explain it for me, is about, well, nobody had really understood how famous that they were.
Right.
So they almost tried to make fun of it. This is almost like satire to me. Like they almost tried to poke fun at how big they had become because they didn't know what to do about it.
Yeah, there's no. It's hard to explain. Like there's no corollary to it. Like there's nobody else was that famous. Not the Rolling Stones, not Led Zeppelin, not nobody was that famous.
Here's another quick question that I had. You said it's kind of in the middle of their catalog. What albums are preceding this album?
A lot of preceding this one. This is one of the things I wanted to like bring up actually. You kind of mentally divide the Beatles catalog into like two parts.
Okay.
Like from people quibble about whether Rubber Soul is the dividing point or Revolver is. That's like late 1965, 1966. Like pre that is essentially the boy band Beatles, like Love Me Do, Twist and Shout, which is a cover, obviously, but I Want to Hold Your Hand, those kind of like straight up pop songs. Like
Right.
those songs are all like pre 1965.
Right.
And Hard Day's Night and all of those songs too. But
yeah, I'm looking at this stuff, but when did they become the Beatles though? You know what I'm saying?
Like,
is that Rubber Soul?
They become the Beatles, like famous Beatles. Probably when they come to America for the first time and play on Ed Sullivan. That's like 1962, maybe, or three. Like that's, I mean, the band has been around for 2 or 3 years by then. They've been playing like 15-hour sets in bars in Germany to hone their craft all night for a couple years, and then they come back to England and start taking over England, and then the British invasion of the United States is like 1964, I believe. The people in the United States were familiar with them before then, but that was because there were people like screaming as they got off the airplane in the United States the first time. But that is what, at least as far as our country is concerned, like kicked them into the stratosphere. They released an insane amount of music. They were a recording artist from like 1961 or two until 1970.
I get what you're saying, but I mean,
am I not answering your question? That
no.
Okay.
When did they become the Beatles though? Like when are they like walking icons and legends? Like, because this album and this just even now that I'm hearing you say all this, going back to this record, you're telling me this is like 1967.
Sgt. Pepper's 1967, yeah.
So this happened really, really fast, then, is what you're telling me.
Mm-hmm.
But at what point did it actually happen? Like, when are they like bigger than everybody else? At what point did that happen?
That is around. That's what I was trying to answer. Maybe I didn't say it very clearly. Like when they come to America, when they release Hard Day's Night, which is 1964, and release Rubber Soul 1965, that is when they're like into the stratosphere.
Okay.
This album is prior to that, they would be like, you'd think of them as like NSYNC or Backstreet Boys on steroids, like that kind of all the girls screaming at them, kind of that. They became what we think of as not a boy band, but as iconic musicians, probably with Rubber Soul and Revolver, which was late 1965, early 1966, which are the albums that come right before Sgt. Pepper.
Are those those albums are those albums more highly regarded
than Sgt. Pepper? It depends on who you ask, honestly. The Sgt. Pepper is the most innovative. When you look at people doing lists of the best albums in rock and roll history, or the best albums in British music history, or whatever, Sgt. Pepper or Revolver are usually the first one, or usually number one. Like, so it depends on people's personal taste, honestly. But both of them are always in the top 10, usually in the top 5. Like, the run they went on from December 1965, which is when Rubber Soul was released, to the release of Abbey Road and Let It Be, which would have been May of 1970, is probably the single greatest run of albums, certainly in rock and roll history, but probably in musical history too. That's Rubber Soul, Revolver, Sgt. Pepper, Magical Mystery Tour, the White Album, which is a double album, Abbey Road, and Let It Be. Like, all of those were between December 1965 and May 1970. That's 7 albums, 8, and all of them are stone cold classics, like in a row. And some of them they were releasing 2 a year. Like, it's an insane run of music.
So I've been actually told that that this album, that Sgt. Pepper's, is like the last real album they recorded together.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it is. After that, they were. I mean, after that is when John met Yoko, and so they were doing
for their own blood. Yeah, too big for their own good. Because I've heard stories about how the White Album was recorded, which is amazing. That piece of work sounds like that brilliant for as like disjointed as they appeared to.
Yeah, there were a lot of drugs involved in that, and there were also a lot of it's a bunch of solo songs basically, like that are put together on an album that people sang over top of.
Shout out to Ringo for jumping from room to room.
Yeah, Ringo's the glue, right? I mean, both as a drummer, he is one of the best drummers in rock and roll history. He's not the most like pyrotechnic. He's not going all over the place, but he's like, as he does what the songs need and doesn't do a beat out of place and doesn't do a beat more than is necessary and just keeps it all together. And it's actually appropriate to talk about because he's the one who sings with a little help from my friends. Like he usually gets like one song per album that they let him sing. It's a McCartney song, but like he does the, like, with a little help from my friends could be a Tony Bennett song, or it could be like a lounge singer song. That kind of a little cheesy, right? But
right.
So it's also a feel good song to come back around, right?
Feel good and you're pulling it off. So here was my other question to you: is that the way that this song was composed, just structure wise, had this ever been done before?
I don't think it had.
Okay, because
it's one of, if it's not the first concept album, it's certainly one of them.
And I mean, even the concept of how the song was conceptualized, like the structure of the song. Had anybody even structured a song like this before? Is what my question to you. That was my overall question. Because when I heard this and I looked at the date on it, I was like, oh, they're the first ones to do it like that.
Yeah, because they are. The setup for those people who haven't listened to it is, you have like audience talking at the very, very beginning. It's like as the record starts, and then you have like music start playing, and then you have like somebody singing to kind of introduce the band, so to speak. And then the band starts playing a little bit. When they sing, "We're Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band. We'd love to see you once again." So they're kind of introducing themselves, and then the MC, not as we would consider it in hip hop, but the MC as the master of ceremonies, I guess, the one is introducing the band, says, "We don't really want to start the show, but I thought you'd like to know the singer's going to sing a song, and we want you all to sing along." It is cheeseball, but it's like, is what they were doing is they were creating another persona for themselves, because the Beatles was too big. Like they were, and they were also like experimenting with all kinds of, not just drugs, but like in the studio, to see what like the limits of studio recording were. Because previous to this album, really, this is one of the very first albums to ever do this. You had to structure the songs in a way and play them in a way that you could like replicate them believably live, right? And this album was not written with the intention that it was going to be played live. So they were pushing the limits of what a studio session could do.
Bombs Over Baghdad-ish, kind of like that.
Yeah, like doing that, like
pushing the limit.
And it also inspired lots of great, like the Beach Boys' Pet Sounds, which is another one of those great albums, was written in response to this. Like Brian Wilson listened to this and was like, let me try to do some of that. Like, so he pushed it even further. And then the White Album comes as a response. Like they're talking back and forth to each other.
That makes sense, because usually when you go through a list to go through greatest rock and roll albums, it usually goes something like Revolver, Pet Sound, Sergeant Pepper's, or something, some sort of like mix and mash of that with the White Album and Rubber Soul falling on the back end of the top 10.
Yeah.
And so, and I think there's another Beach Boys album,
Smile.
Smile.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so that makes sense when you say that now, me knowing all of these albums separately, but now I can see like the response to it. That's kind of comparable to like what Nas and Biggie are doing in the mid before. Yeah, where it's like
they're sort of in competition, but also doing what you were talking about, Fife and Q-Tip doing, like just pushing each other's level up, like in response to each other. Right?
Level thing. No. It's a healthy response. It's that it's competition musically, like in the healthy way, where it's like, man, those guys are brilliant. So are we. Let's go.
Yeah. And because they're not doing the same thing. Like if you've listened to I know you've listened to Sgt. Pepper and Pet Sounds, but like if the people listening to this have listened to both of those records, they don't sound a lot alike. But but when you think of them in the context of them both trying to be pushing the limits of what a studio can do in 1967, 68, it makes a lot more sense.
So that's what I mean about pushing the boundaries. So there's a song on that Nas has on it, was written called The Setup, and that's a story. And Biggie has this song on Life After Death called Niggas Bleed. And if you listen to the songs right next to each other, it's like you can hear that they listen to each other. You know what I mean? Even though the songs are totally different stylistically in terms of how it's being delivered, you can tell they're listening to each other because there's a certain level that you operate on, you know?
And there's not very many people that can operate on that level.
Right. And so you hear the people that operate on those on that level, because that's what motivates you when you reach that level. So yes. So that makes sense about the level of greatness that they help bring out in each other musically too. Yeah.
And it comes back around too to the Tribe song too, because they are both doing something that is not super complex. I mean, the studio stuff is complex, like the production is complex, but I'm not as familiar with Tribe stuff, but like one would assume like the incorporation of the jazz into the beats and stuff like that is a complex production thing. But like lyrically, like if you just listen to the song, it doesn't sound complicated in the way like Bombs Over Baghdad does, for example.
It's not over your head,
right? It's and like, what would you think if I sang out of tune? Would you stand up and walk out on me? Like that's just a straightforward like melody that you could hear thousands of people singing.
No. It's like the Tribe thing. We oftentimes, I think we've discussed this, it's like, you know, it's the simple things done well sometimes that really stay with people. It's like the Hook to Award Tour. We're on a award tour with Muhammad, my man, going each and every place with the mic in our hand. And then they start listing off the cities. It's not complicated.
No. And like the thing that I was the most familiar with from that song is the do that, like that, which is obviously not I mean, I guess it's scat singing too, now that I think about it being jazz, but it's not super lyrical.
No,
but the Beatles songs aren't either. Like they're not.
It goes back to that macro level of where Andre and Q-Tip are similar, though. When we were talking about Miss Jackson, what's the most memorable part? Forever, ever, forever.
Exactly.
Ever. Yep. Just like Q-Tip, do that. So yeah, so some similar genius going on in terms of making the simple sound beautiful and sublime. Like he starts off with "People give you ears, so I be sublime." Like he lets you know how he's about to come off on the record.
And he even has the acute joke too. That's right before it makes me laugh every time.
Yeah, drop it on an angle, acute at that. Yeah.
This one of those fun double meanings that, and that's one of those things that I love about both the Tribe song and the Beatles song is that they are not, they're huge, iconic stars, but they're not too big or too proud to throw jokes in there and to make fun of themselves and to make, the Tribe is not really making fun of himself, but like to not like put himself on this pedestal above everybody else, where he clearly could be.
They don't take themselves too seriously.
Yeah, exactly.
Yes. They don't want to have fun, but try to enjoy themselves still, despite
there was, I don't know if you know this, that there was a conspiracy theory thing from like the 60s that Paul McCartney died in a car crash. Have you heard this?
That's ridiculous.
It is incredibly ridiculous. But like, and they said that the conspiracy goes that in November 1966, which would have been right before the recording of Sgt. Pepper, that he died in a car crash outside of London, and they got a body double to stand in for him for like the rest of their career, which, as you said, is absurd. But it shows the Beatles themselves were familiar with this like conspiracy, like that they had been covering up stuff. So later in their career, they have the sense of humor that they would like put in references to Paul being dead in like the songs just to fuck with people.
Yes.
Like
okay.
That's this the same kind of thing. Like
Yes, now. Okay.
yeah, it's but the amount of like drugs people would have to take to believe that they could find somebody who looked believably enough like Paul McCartney before the era of serious plastic surgery in 1966, that this person was also an accomplished singer and bass player and guitarist and songwriter, that could like that's absurd. Like, it's absurd.
No, see, it's only absurd. I mean, I hate to tell it to you like this, Andrew. This is one of those things that it's like, well, you have to understand. And we had an English teacher in high school who told us this, or at least she told me this. Well, the average person is stupid.
Yeah, she told all of us that.
Okay. I thought it was all of us that she told that. Average person is stupid. And consider yourself to be fortunate not to be one of those unfortunate people.
Yeah. Amen. Amen.
And when you're the most famous group in the world, you can get a lot of people to believe stuff like that. That's what I'm saying. So it's like when you say it, it's like, no, like in a controlled room, you know what I mean? A controlled agent like that, it's like, no, that's absurd. That's ludicrous. But when you take the biggest group ever in the world,
and them being aware that it's happening and like feeding stuff into it on purpose just to mess with people, like that's
right. But no, it's more plausible. Like what they did is very, very plausible because the believability factor of it is higher just based on what our former English teacher from high school told us about the average human being.
Yeah. Shout out Angela Brathwaite. Yeah, so that's probably an okay place to stop. I mean, I keep going about Beatles, but that seems like a reasonable place.
That seems pretty
place
good.
to stop.
Yeah, Angela Brathwaite, shout out. It's a good place to stop.